Hello and welcome to the Mysteries of History podcast with me, your host, Nick Monk. Each week together we will take a look at a fascinating piece of history. As gruesome, mysterious, unbelievable that these tales may sound, one thing is for sure. These events happened, these people existed, and these places have made their mark on our historical landscape. Be sure to check out the website, themysteriesofhistory.com, where you can access all of the podcasts and show notes. And of course the blog, where we will give you an extra insight into each episode, as well as all sorts of unbelievable historical content. You can also find us on social media, where you can let us know what you think of the podcast episodes, or even suggest a new historical mystery for us to investigate. So now, let's take a look at this week's mysterious historical tale. In this episode, we're heading back, way back in time, over 5,000 years ago. The building of Stonehenge was in its very earliest phases. An early henge monument was all that existed. The pyramids in Giza of the Old Kingdom were yet to be constructed. It may surprise you then to know that here we find a civilized and organized culture, a people that use their technological skill, craftsmanship and knowledge of available natural resources to construct a sophisticated settlement, complete with furniture and storage units carved into stone. This is Neolithic Britain, spanning a time period between 4100 and 2500 BC. This is a time where a cultural revolution is in action. The preceding Mesolithic period has seen our ancestors as hunter-gatherers, roaming between temporary settlements, chasing game, and struggling to survive. In Neolithic Britain, or the New Stone Age as it is also known, people shift to a more sedentary style of life, one of settled agriculture, what we today would call farming. New technologies such as pottery making, the production of stone tools, and the emergence of monument building are synonymous with this period of history. Farming was characterized by the cultivation of wheat and barley and other crops, and the domestication of animals like cattle, sheep and pigs was introduced. With a more settled lifestyle, people began to enclose their livestock, and fields of crops emerged. New stone tools like polished axes and the production of pottery were developed and used for clearing land, farming and other tasks. Now it is towards the end of the Neolithic period that we see large communal tombs or long barrows emerge, causewayed enclosures and later timber and stone circles, most famously represented by Stonehenge in Avebury. A large part of the mystery surrounding the Neolithic period is that we simply do not to this day really know the purpose of stone circles such as Stonehenge and Avebury. Why did people put so much effort and labour into producing these incredible sites? This is most certainly a debate for another podcast or two. But we begin to understand that the Neolithic period was a time of technological as well as cultural advancement in society. What then caused such a massive cultural shift away from the hunter-gatherer lifestyle to a more sedentary farming approach? Fortunately, a recent research project carried out by members of the Natural History Museum may well have settled this mystery that has caused such debate amongst the academic community for decades. Was the adoption of Neolithic farming cultures the result of the native population adapting and changing? Or was this cultural shift a result of new ideas and technologies coming from migrant farmers from continental Europe? Dr. Tom Booth and his colleagues looked at genetics to try and unravel the mystery as to why the population of the British Isles became more sedentary and adopted the farming culture that is typical of the Neolithic period. And so what the team did was to study skeletons of the late Mesolithic period and compare them with skeletons of the Neolithic culture, the New Stone Age. Now, as an aside, one of the skeletons of the Mesolithic period that was studied was the famous Cheddar Man. Now, this was a skeleton that was found in Cheddar Gorge, which is in Somerset. Cheddar Man is in fact the earliest near-complete skeleton found in the United Kingdom. Cheddar Man was an early Mesolithic hunter-gatherer who died in his early 20s. Now, what is even more astonishing about this story is that in the 1990s, when Cheddar Man was discovered, DNA analysis was carried out of the local population, and incredibly, a living relative was found in the history teacher Adrian Targett, a local man from Somerset. Now, whilst the study provided a genetic link between Cheddar Man and Adrian Targett, it didn't provide a direct link of descent between the two. Many individuals within the same geographic area could indeed share the same mitochondrial DNA. Either way, though, what an incredible story, and it really demonstrates to us that even after thousands of years, the gene pool in particular areas can remain very localized. So now back to the research project of Dr. Booth and the Natural History Museum. They discovered some interesting things. They discovered that the Mesolithic DNA began to show a change as the Neolithic period began. There was a new genetic influence taking hold upon the skeletons. So essentially, as the Neolithic period began and the farming culture began to take hold and there was a big cultural shift, there was essentially a bigger change in the ancestry of the British population. The major finding from this research project was that essentially this DNA was coming from continental Europe. Now, what the research team discovered is that this new genetic influence, this new DNA in the gene pool of not just the British Isles, but actually Europe, was coming from the coast of the Aegean Sea, the coast of Turkey. And so the conclusion that is made is that farming originated in the Near East and spread across Western Europe and into the British Isles. The analysis of ancient human DNA has shown that every time the Neolithic culture arrived in a region of Europe, it appears alongside new genetic ancestry that came from areas around the Aegean Sea. Now, what this suggests is that it was not just farming cultures that swept across the continent, but actual farmers too. Now, really importantly, the DNA evidence collected by the research team also shows that these new farmers who were moving through unfamiliar land and across grasslands of Europe were also mixing with the local hunter-gatherer populations. Evidence collected shows that as this new Neolithic population moved west, the research team were able to track increasing levels of local hunter-gatherer signatures in their genetics. Now, this strongly suggests that it wasn't a case of one population wiping out the other. Instead, it is more likely that they were mixing. Neolithic farming practices and domestication of crops and animals also means that the Aegean ancestry, the Neolithic ancestry, nearly always dominated in the research findings because farming allowed these people, these Neolithic populations, to maintain much larger population sizes. And this means that even though they were mixing continuously, the hunter-gatherers, the Mesolithic population, if you like, were always a more minor component in the overall genetics. As farmers moved from east to west, by the time they reached what we know as modern-day Spain, this accumulation meant that about 40% of their ancestry could be traced back to the original hunter-gatherers of the Mesolithic period that they mixed with as they moved across the continent. So we've now explored the basic factors that led to this cultural and technological revolution that we call the New Stone Age or Neolithic period. So now we must take our story all the way to the northernmost point of the British Isles to explore this unique and incredible Neolithic community and settlement known as Skara Brae. It is 1850 and the Orkney Islands, at the very northern part of the British Isles, is being battered by a brutal storm that will claim the lives of over 200 local residents. On the Bay of Scale, waves pound the cliffs with relentless force, but as the winds die down, something incredible emerges. A local laird and farmer named William Watt goes out to survey the damage, but what he finds is not erosion, but something truly incredible. Walls, passageways, stone furniture, an entire village buried beneath the sand, hidden for millennia, but now exposed to reveal its secrets. Skara Brae, a Neolithic village, nestled on the Orkney Islands off the northern coast of Scotland, stand as one of the most remarkable archaeological sites in Europe. Its exceptional preservation offers an unparalleled glimpse into prehistoric life, making it a focal point for researchers and visitors alike. Yet despite extensive study, numerous mysteries continue to surround this ancient settlement. Often called the Scottish Pompeii, Skara Brae is the best preserved Neolithic village in northern Europe. It is called the Scottish Pompeii not because it was destroyed in a cataclysm, but because it is so well preserved. It wasn't until 1927 that systematic excavations began under the direction of Professor Vere Gordon-Childe from the University of Edinburgh. These excavations revealed a complex of 8 interconnected dwellings, each furnished with stone-built furniture, including beds, dressers and hearths, all remarkably well preserved due to the site's semi-subterranean construction and the insulating properties of the midden. These are mounds of domestic refuse that enveloped the structures. So we must remind ourselves that we are in the Neolithic period here. This is a Neolithic community and a set of Neolithic dwellings. We're talking about a time that is up to 5,000 years ago. And here we find a community carving furniture, tables, possibly even wardrobe-like structures. It's truly amazing, incredible in fact, that our ancestors so long ago were seemingly way more sophisticated than we've ever really given them credit for. The stereotypical images of the Stone Age man covered in an animal loincloth, running around with a club in his hand, is so far removed from the reality that we find here at Skara Brae. The design of Skara Brae's houses reflect a sophisticated understanding of environmental adaptation. Constructed entirely from locally sourced stone, the dwellings were built into large mounds of midden, providing natural insulation against the harsh Orkney climate. Each house comprises a single room, approximately 40 square metres in size, with a central hearth, built-in stone beds, and a dresser opposite the entrance. Another really fascinating feature is that in some houses there are seemingly small tanks set into the floor, possibly used for preparing fish bait, indicating a diet rich in marine resources. Now, this isn't surprising, as Skara Brae is located very near a loch and, of course, the ocean nearby. This uniformity in design really does suggest a highly organised society with shared cultural practices. This is a community far removed from the hunter-gatherers, and seemingly we have here a community that was cohesive and probably very efficient in hunting, preparing food, and most probably more than surviving, as we're about to find out. There is good evidence to suggest that the inhabitants of Skara Brae were skilled farmers, hunters, and fishermen. Archaeological findings include bones of cattle, sheep, and pigs, as well as remains of barley and wheat, indicating early agricultural domestication and practices. They also hunted deer and seabirds and fished for giant cod and other marine life. You may ask, how do we know this? How do we know what these people's diet consisted of? Well, as I've recently mentioned, these dwellings were built around the middens or rubbish chips, so as well as providing insulation against the prevailing onshore winds, the middens were full of the foodstuffs that the people ate. So what is left behind in the archaeological record is bones and possibly tools. And this is what archaeologists found. They found all of these bones, fish bones, sheep, cattle bones, and obviously the grain from the barley and the wheat. So we get a really detailed picture of the diet of the Neolithic people at Skara Brae, which can tell us so much about their lifestyle and sophisticated way that they were living. Now, another really interesting fact that has emerged after archaeological excavation at Skara Brae is that to date no weaponry has been found at the site, suggesting a peaceful community. If you are not making weapons, well, you're not making weapons for a reason, and that's probably because you're not feeling threatened. So that tells us a lot of really interesting information, that we have here a sophisticated community, living, having a large range of food sources available to them, and seemingly, from the evidence, living in harmony. Now, as is true with history and archaeology, our perceptions on the past have to be and can only be based upon the evidence that we find. Now, the fact that we've not found any weapons could also suggest it's just simply that. We haven't found any weapons. It doesn't necessarily mean that life was entirely peaceful for them and there wasn't conflict with neighbouring communities. Now, some of the most incredible finds at Skara Brae have been the presence of decorative items such as beads and pendants and intricately carved stone objects. And this all points to a society that valued art and craftsmanship. Now, these carved stone objects in particular are really fascinating for many people, including myself, in that we're not really sure what they are. But what we are sure of, and that's because we can see the detail, is that they are made with a huge amount of skill and effort. A lot of time would have gone into making these stone objects. Now, I'll put some photos on the blog and social media of these stone objects as they were discovered, as they exist now, and you'll be able to see for yourselves like how well they're made. These are made by a skilled stoneworker using tools that they have made themselves. So they have a intricate knowledge of stonework, stone, what stone is good to carve with versus obviously stone that is perhaps too soft or brittle. So this is high intelligence, really high intelligence. Now, we have to be careful how we interpret these stone objects. We can have, all of us can have our own opinion, and each opinion, to be honest, is as valid as the other. We can only go on the evidence, as I've recently just mentioned. We can only go on the evidence in front of us. And what we have here is a demonstration of high skill, but it's for what purpose we just don't know. And that's the fascinating thing. That's the mystery. That's part of the mystery about Skara Brae. I've heard so many theories. Are these stone objects apprentice pieces? When you're younger in Skara Brae, you no doubt have to learn many skills, and is one of them how to work stone properly. So are these pieces of stone where you learnt how to use the tools, you learnt how to carve intricately? Are they more gaming pieces? Are they ritualistic pieces? That gets thrown out there a lot in archaeology. All we can do is study them. All you can do is have a look at them and come to your own conclusions. But they are really, really fascinating. And to me, these stone objects do remind me of the current debate that is going on regarding the dodecahedron object that's been found recently in the UK. Perhaps in a Roman context, perhaps it's an earlier object. But again, we've got a fascinating piece of metalwork, and we really have no idea what it's for. That there isn't seemingly any written record in the Roman period about this dodecahedron. You may well have seen articles or TV programs talking about the dodecahedron. To me, these stone objects of Skara Brae fall into the same category as the dodecahedron, in that we really don't know, and possibly never will know, what they're really for. But doesn't that make it really fascinating and interesting and exciting? And I think that's a lot of why I really love archaeology and history, in that we can discover things that are just not known. When you discover something that is new to our culture, it presents a really intellectual problem for us all. And that's just great. Now, in addition to these stone objects, it was also discovered that the inhabitants of Skara Brae may have been using gaming dice. Archaeologists discovered these little stone cuboid objects that have, grooved dots on each side of them, and indeed have grooves on some of the corners, and they do look very much like gaming dice. Now, this would imply that the residents of Skara Brae were engaged in leisure activities, some sort of game. Perhaps it was an integral part of their life. So again, this is truly fascinating. So we're talking about people of the new Stone Age not necessarily struggling to survive, but having the time to play games with dice, potentially. So that tells us a lot about the society. Perhaps this is a society that is not feeling stress and threatened, or striving to find enough food to survive. This world could be a society that is very much at ease with itself and has the time and resources to engage in leisure activities. That's a massive bit of knowledge for us to understand about the Neolithic people, if of course they're gaming dice, because like I've already said, we've got to be very careful with our 21st century eyes looking at these stone objects. They may well look like gaming dice to us, and to be honest, they do look like gaming dice. But it doesn't mean that in Neolithic Britain these objects were gaming dice, if that makes sense. The jury's out there. Have a look at the images I'll post, and let me know what you think. Now, it's been suggested that Skara Brae's inhabitants engaged in complex spiritual and ritualistic practices. Now, you may ask, how do we actually know that? Well, we don't actually know that, but we have to base it upon the evidence that we have. Now, apart from everything else that has been found at Skara Brae, 5 carved stone balls were also found at this site. Now, in Scotland, over 400 of these objects have been found dating back to the Neolithic period. And at Skara Brae, 5 were found. Now, these stone balls are usually round or roughly oval, and they're about 7 centimetres in diameter, or about 2 3/4 inches. And they're unusual in that they have typically between 3 and about 160 protruding knobs all over the surface, all through the circumference of the stone ball, if you like. And they range from having simply just these knobs, or they can have intricate carvings on them. There's quite a variation. And again, we really don't know what they're for. It's suggested that they are a ritualistic item, or perhaps an item of status, but we are just making suppositions. Again, we don't know. But what we can say, and what we do know, is that these objects, yet again, have taken a lot of skill and time and effort to produce. Now, in Neolithic Britain, anything that took your time and effort and skill to produce was done for a purpose, either a practical purpose or another purpose, be it religious, based on status, but it's got to be one of those things. But again, I'll share images of these stone balls on social media and on the website, and you can have a look. But again, they're just the most incredible things coming from 5,000 years ago. If you said to somebody now, here's a piece of stone and I want you to replicate these stone balls from Skara Brae, it would be a challenge for anybody. Another artefact that has been found at Skara Brae is pieces of polished hematite. So hematite is another stone. So these hematite nodules are polished in a way that scholars believe that they were likely used for polishing leather, shining leather up. And some of these pieces of hematite even show striations and have little facets in them. And this suggests that they were possibly used for rubbing, potentially to produce pigments. So what we're saying is the inhabitants of Skara Brae would have found natural pigments, so these could have come from other rocks or plant material, and they were using the hematite to ground them down, essentially, a bit like a pestle and mortar, to produce pigments. So the suggestion is that they were making pigments maybe for body decoration, something similar to what we would recognise as a tattoo or face paint, or perhaps for other ritualistic purposes or behaviours. Now, in archaeology and history, whenever an academic says a ritualistic practice, it often means that we don't know really what they were for. But I think pigments, I think it's got to be one of the things that I've just mentioned. I think it's got to be a body paint, face paint or something similar. So again, we're seeing a culture that is very sophisticated, and if we're talking about anything approaching religion, or indeed people just making a social choice to decorate themselves, that's something, again, extremely interesting for us to learn about. So as we've been discussing, we have a culture here at Skara Brae and a society that are technologically very advanced. They're producing and have the skill and knowledge to make extremely intricate carved stone objects. And we have a society, a culture that, again, may be socially well advanced. We've mentioned rituals, religion, social status, perhaps, or just social choices in terms of, putting a tattoo on or making face paint. It is then very surprising to know that at around 2500 BC, Skara Brae was abandoned. The archaeological evidence shows us that it was abandoned. And again, the reasons for this do remain quite unclear. The archaeological evidence does suggest, though, that the people of Skara Brae left quite quickly, relatively speaking. Some of the homes appear undisturbed, tools are still left in place, and there is even one home that has beads scattered on the floor. People suggest that were these dropped mid-stride as people rushed to leave the settlement? Why, though, did they rush to leave the settlement? And yes, there are, shall we call them, fringe theorists who mention things like aliens and Atlantis, etc., etc., but we shall probably leave the fringe theorists where they are. Now, on a more sensible note, one prevailing theory is that a significant climatic shift led to colder and wetter conditions at Skara Brae, making the site less hospitable, despite the fact that the dwellings at Skara Brae had been constructed extremely well to protect them from the elements. Perhaps conditions became so unbearable that the community felt that they had to move on to somewhere more sheltered. But this environmental change could have disrupted agricultural practices and food sources, prompting the community to simply relocate to somewhere more suitable. Alternatively, another theory that goes around is that some scholars propose that the construction of new monumental sites, such as at Mashal and the Ring of Brodgar, which are on the largest island of the Orkney Islands, may have shifted the social and religious focus of the population, and simply the population may have declined and moved from Skara Brae to these other sites. But again, this exact cause of abandonment continues to this day to be a topic of research and speculation, because as we've already discussed, seemingly Skara Brae was a thriving community that had significant food resources, may have even had, the community had time to play games and, socially develop and tattoo themselves, put on face paint. This is all sounding like a community that was very at ease with itself. The fact that no weapons have been found also suggests that the community didn't feel threatened. So it is unusual that this community suddenly disappears in 2500 BC. And a lot of the mystery surrounding Skara Brae is why was such a thriving community abandoned so quickly in terms of, the archaeological record. The mystery remains. The cultural and technological advancements of Skara Brae suggest that its inhabitants were part of a broader network of Neolithic communities. The discovery of similar carved stone balls in other regions, including Ireland and Norway, indicates that there were interactions and exchanges across the North Sea. The presence of a carved stone ball in Norway, known as the Lindesand stone, raises intriguing questions about prehistoric maritime capabilities and the extent of travel and trade during this period. This artifact suggests that Neolithic people may have had the ability to navigate open seas, challenging previous assumptions about their seafaring skills. So here we have a population that are not only technologically advanced in terms of stone making, carving, pigment production, social skills. They may also have been talented and skilled seafarers. Now that opens up literally a whole world of possibility if we're talking about international trade, as we are here really. The question's got to be, how far were the Neolithic people trading, and what influences did this trade have on the Neolithic culture? What influences were perhaps even imported into the Neolithic culture? These are questions that remain. These are open questions that historians and archaeologists are continuing to try and understand. So it is no wonder that Skara Brae continues to be a focal point for archaeological research. Ongoing excavations and studies aim to uncover more about the site's construction techniques, daily life, and the reasons behind its abandonment. Advancements in technologies such as ground-penetrating radar and DNA analysis hold the potential to reveal new insights into the lives of Skara Brae's inhabitants. As research progresses, Skara Brae remains a testament to the ingenuity and resilience of early human societies. As I mentioned earlier on in this podcast, we have to rewrite our opinions and views on Neolithic people quite drastically. If you knew perhaps very little about the Neolithic period before listening to this podcast, I hope that you now understand that we have been talking about a very advanced society, far removed from the stereotypical caveman which has existed in popular culture for decades and decades. We're talking about a culture that existed before the construction of Stonehenge and the Great Pyramids. That's just an amazing concept to understand. We talk about Stonehenge continuously as, we talk about how did these stones become to be there, how were they carved, how were they moved, and that enigma remains, frankly. But here we're talking about a population, a society that existed well before Stonehenge. And this is what makes Skara Brae such an impressive and important site. Skara Brae stands as a remarkable testament to Neolithic innovation and societal organisation, the likes of which we've very rarely seen before. Its well-preserved structures and artefacts offer a rare window into prehistoric life, allowing us to understand the complexities of early human communities. While many questions remain unanswered, ongoing research continues to shed light on this enigmatic site, ensuring that Skara Brae's mysteries will continue to captivate and inspire future generations. Today, Skara Brae is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, preserved in stunning detail on the Orkney mainland, near the Bay of Skara. You can even visit it. You can walk through a modern pathway that overlooks the village, or even look down into the stone homes themselves and begin to create your own theories as to who these people were, how they lived, and why did they abandon this incredible site so quickly.